Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you meet someone new, shake their hand, and hear their name, only to realize just 2 seconds later that the name has completely vanished from your mind? It is a very common and often embarrassing experience that happens to almost everyone at some point in their life. You might feel like you are being rude, or that you are not paying enough attention, or even that your brain is simply not working the way it should. However, the psychology behind why we forget names is actually quite fascinating, and it usually has very little to do with how much we care about the person we just met. In fact, some experts suggest that the more you care about making a good impression, the more likely you are to forget the name entirely, because your brain is overtasked with social anxiety and internal pressure. One of the most powerful reasons this happens is something psychologists call the next in line effect. When we are introduced to someone, our brains are often under a lot of social pressure. We are busy thinking about our own body language, our smile, and what we are going to say next to make a good impression. Because the brain is so occupied with preparing for its own performance, it fails to actually record the information it just received. The name enters your ears, but your brain never hits the save button because it is too busy multitasking. In that moment, your mind is more worried about being liked than it is about collecting data. This creates a gap in our memory where the sound was heard, but the information was never truly processed as something to keep. It is like trying to record a video while the camera is still pointing at your own face instead of the person in front of you. Another important factor is that names are essentially arbitrary bits of information. Unlike a person's job, their hobbies, or where they live, a name usually does not tell you anything about who the person actually is. This is known as the Baker-Baker paradox. If you meet a man named Baker who happens to be a baker, you are much more likely to remember his name because it connects to a visual image of bread and a clear profession. But if his name is Mr. Baker and he is actually a lawyer, there is no logical hook for your brain to hang that information on. To the human brain, a name is just a random label that lacks deep meaning by itself, making it much harder to store in long-term memory. It is like trying to remember a random string of numbers versus remembering a story. The story has a structure and emotion, while the name is just a floating word in a sea of other sounds that do not give any clues about the person's character or life. Scientists also point out that our brains are naturally much better at recognizing faces than they are at remembering specific words or labels. From an evolutionary perspective, it was much more important for our ancestors to recognize if a face belonged to a friend or a dangerous enemy than to remember a specific vocal label. This is why you can often remember exactly where you met someone, what they were wearing, or even the specific color of their eyes, while the name remains a complete mystery. The brain is wired to prioritize visual and spatial data over linguistic data because it was once a matter of survival. We have a massive amount of brain power dedicated to facial recognition, but only a tiny portion dedicated to storing a name during a first meeting. Your brain thinks the face is the real information and the name is just a temporary tag that can be discarded. When we look at children, the psychology of remembering names works a bit differently. Children have a very high level of brain plasticity, which means their brains are like sponges that soak up new information quickly. However, Children often forget names because they prioritize the shared activity or the physical presence of a person over their social identity. If a child plays with a new friend at the park, they might have a wonderful time but never even ask for the other child's name. For a young child, the function of the person is more important than the label of the person. Their brains are focused on the immediate experience and the joy of play, rather than the formal structures of adult society. As they grow older, they begin to understand that a name is a key that unlocks more social information, and they start to pay more attention to it. On the other hand, as people get older, the way they process names changes again. Many older adults find it increasingly difficult to recall names, even for people they have known for a long time. This is often because the brain's processing speed naturally slows down over the years. It is not necessarily that the memory is gone, but rather that the path to reaching that memory is blocked by a massive amount of other information. An older person has a much larger library of names and faces stored in their mind compared to a younger person. When they try to find a specific name, it is like searching for one specific book in a library with millions of volumes. This can lead to the tip of the tongue phenomenon, where you know the name, but you just cannot pull it out of your storage at that exact moment. Modern technology also plays a role in how we remember names across all age groups. In the past, we had to memorize phone numbers and names because we did not have a small computer in our pockets. Today, we know that we can easily find someone on social media or save their contact information in our phones. This creates a phenomenon called digital amnesia, where the brain does not work as hard to remember things that it knows are stored somewhere else. When you meet someone, a part of your subconscious mind might think that you can just find them online later, so it does not put in the effort to move the name into long-term memory. This reliance on technology has changed the way our biological memory handles new social data in the 21st century. We must also consider the concept of focus and interest. Sometimes we forget names because we are genuinely more interested in the conversation itself than in the label of the person. If someone is telling you a very exciting story, your brain will prioritize the details of that story over the name of the teller. Your mind is trying to build a connection based on ideas and shared experiences. In this case, forgetting a name is actually a sign that you were deeply engaged in what the person was saying. It shows that you value the substance of the interaction more than the formal introduction. It means you were listening with your heart and your curiosity rather than just following a social rulebook. People who struggle with this often feel a high level of guilt, but it is helpful to know that even highly intelligent people experience this regularly. Often, it is a sign that you are someone who focuses more on the big picture or the emotional connection of a conversation rather than on tiny, isolated details. To help your brain do a better job, you can try saying the name back out loud as soon as you hear it. This simple act forces your brain to process the word twice. You can also try connecting the name to a funny or vivid image in your mind. For example, if you meet a woman named Rose, you could imagine her hair turning into bright red flower petals. Understanding this process helps us be kinder to ourselves and to others. It shows that forgetting a name is not a character flaw or a sign of low intelligence, but rather a result of how the human mind handles a complex and busy social world. By relaxing and focusing more on the person than on our own performance, we give our memory a better chance to work. In the end, the connection you build with someone is often more important than the specific label they carry. Most people value a sincere conversation and a warm smile over a perfectly remembered name. So the next time you forget a name, do not panic. Take a deep breath, be honest, and ask again. It is a small human moment that we all share, and admitting it can actually make the other person feel more comfortable because they have likely been in the exact same position many times before.